It comes as a genuine surprise to many people when they learn that the First World War was fought beyond the fields of Europe. And that's understandable, because now, a century later, our image of the conflict is almost completely dominated by the Western Front. But all you need to do is take a look at the faces of the men in the photographs that were taken during the war, and what you see is evidence for a conflict that was truly global. At the outbreak of war in 1914, Europe's empires ruled over huge swathes of territory in Asia, in the Americas, in Australia, and almost all of the African continent. And instantly, all of the peoples of those colonies found themselves also at war, not that they had any choice in the matter. When the fighting began, there was a rush to secure vital strategic interests, but there was another process going on. All sides secretly drew up plans for the parts of the world they planned to take control of once the fighting was over. And the British campaign in Mesopotamia is a perfect example of that process. In 1914, large areas of the Middle East were under the control of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. When the Turks sided with Germany and the Central Powers, Britain was anxious not to lose control of the oil fields she had established in Mesopotamia, the area we now know as Iraq. That region became the focus for a bitter and costly conflict. Basra, such a familiar name today, but 100 years ago it was the base of operations for the British Army, and it was from there that British and Indian troops set off for what was to become a long, complicated and challenging campaign. The campaign led to a series of titanic battles that were fought along the Tigris River. The British launched what seemed to be an unstoppable advance, but the Turks halted them, pushed them back, and with each battle and each siege, the death toll increased. Towards the end of 1918, the British finally defeated the Ottoman Turks and set about, along with the French, establishing themselves as the dominant power in the Middle East. Today, this whole campaign, along with the 100,000 British and Indian casualties, has been largely forgotten. Yet I think the war in the Middle East is the perfect example of how a conflict in Europe spilled out into other continents. So Germany goes to war with Britain, which involves Germany's ally, Ottoman Turkey. The British seek to defend their interests in the Middle East against the Turks, but they do so using their own empire, men from India, men from Australia and New Zealand. And they turn to their ally, the French, who bring in men from their empire, from North Africa and West Africa. There were some people, even as late as 1915, who were still calling this the Great European War, yet in reality it had been global since day one. But there is another reason why we should remember the Mesopotamia campaign. And that's because for most of the 21st century, British soldiers, the great-grandsons of the soldiers of the First World War, have found themselves fighting on the same battlefields. After the war, the borders of the entire region were redrawn in the sands of the defeated Ottoman Empire, and special care was taken to make sure that the British kept hold of their precious oil fields. The lines that were drawn into the sand of the Middle East were drawn for the convenience of the winners, of the British and the French. But today, a century later, those lines in the sand are beginning to blur and to break down as the ethnic and the religious identities of the people of the region, identities that were ignored just after the war, begin to reassert themselves. The First World War shaped the world we live in many ways, the world beyond Europe as well as the world in Europe. But who knows how long the borders and the nations created by the First World War are going to last. After all, the empires that drew those lines on the maps have long gone.